Thank you everyone for attending today, especially our guests. It's a great honour to collaborate with the Ruth Jackson Orthopaedic Society. IODA and RJOS have worked very closely over the last few years, so it's great to get together to do this. I'm going to hand over first to our President of the Ruth Jackson Orthopaedic Association, Mary Mulcahey, who will introduce our guest speakers for our session today, which is titled Women in Orthopaedics, Leadership, Being Intentional and Minimising Bias. Thanks, Mary.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks everyone who's here and who's in the process of joining. I'm just going to pull these up here to give an overview of our faculty. So we have a great webinar planned. First is Dr. Jim Ficke, who is professor and chair in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. He's a foot and ankle surgeon here in the United States, and he has served in the U.S. Army for over 30 years, as well as being very actively involved in the Society of Military Orthopedic Surgeons. He received the Johns Hopkins Award for Advancement of Women in Medicine, Women in Science and Medicine, and he's a very active member of RJOS. So thanks so much, Jim, for being here. He's going to be speaking about the importance of leadership in driving diversity. Next, we have Dr. Laurie Hiemstra, who is a sports medicine surgeon in Banff, Canada. She's an associate professor at the University of Calgary, and she's on the board of directors for the Patellofemoral Foundation, as well as several other societies. She's very actively involved in ISACOS, and she's been really involved in the diversity space for many years, being engaged in several diversity initiatives. And Laurie is currently the president of the Canadian Orthopaedic Association, and she's the first woman to hold that role. Laurie is going to be speaking about being intentional about the inclusion of women in orthopedics. And then we have Dr. Ian Incoll, who is an Australian surgeon educator, and he's an orthopedic surgeon. He's past president and chair of education and training, and inaugural dean of education of the Australian Orthopaedic Association. He holds several important roles in Australia. He's published on surgical education and diversity within surgery, and he has spoken nationally and internationally about curriculum design and implementation and diversity. He was awarded the RACS Sir Allen Newton Medal for Surgical Education and the AOA Leadership Award in 2021. Ian is going to be speaking today about minimizing unconscious bias in residency selection and training. And then also, I just wanted to give a huge shout out and thank you to Dr. Jenny Green, who's currently president of IODA and really worked very hard to help coordinate this webinar. It's been wonderful collaborating with her through RJOS and IODA over the past 3 years. So we're really excited for all of you to be here. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the webinar.
So I guess just,
yep.
Thank you.
Sorry, turning it back over to Jenny.
Yes, thanks. So I would just like to also introduce our guest panelists to make this a truly global event. We will have 3 guests from around the world. Rajuta Mehta from India. Rajuta is a pediatric orthopedic surgeon. She's the vice president of the Bombay Orthopaedic Society, and she's the original chair of VOICE, which is the Women Orthopedic Surgeons of India Collective Empowerment, which was formed several years ago. And she has now most recently been appointed the chair of the Asia Pacific Orthopaedic Association Women's Advocacy Group. And this represents over 60,000 orthopaedic surgeons at the APOA, and specifically the female members. We also have Samantha Tross from the UK. Samantha is the first Afro-Caribbean orthopaedic surgeon in the UK, and she's an arthroplasty surgeon. Samantha has been doing advocacy for many decades now. She's been noted to be one of the top most influential people in the UK of Afro-Caribbean heritage, and she's also the founder of the British Association of Black Surgeons and the IODA secretary. And finally, we have Gala Santini from Argentina. Gala is a foot and ankle surgeon. She is the chair of the Argentinian Association of Orthopedics and Trauma. the women's group in the Women's Society in the AAOT, and has been very active in Latin America in collaborating with other nations to really drive diversity. Most recently holding the first diversity symposium in Latin America, inviting women from both Peru and Brazil and other leaders in diversity from around the world. So welcome, Gala. So I'd like to invite our first speaker, Jim Ficke, the importance of leadership in driving diversity. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's really is a privilege to be part of this, and I'm going to ensure that my slides are. There we go. I think you can all see those, and so it really, you know, as said, I've been tasked with talking about leadership driving orthopedic improvement in diversity and inclusion, and I have no financial conflicts, but what I do have is a strong interest in leadership, and I've done this for 30 years in the Army, as has been said. I hearken back to Dr. Weinstein, who Stuart Weinstein was the president of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons in 2004. And he commented in a paper on leadership, what's important is that success is never achieved alone, that he's had a wonderful life in orthopedic surgery, thanks to generosity of those who mentored, gave him opportunities, and provided nurturing environments. And so when we think about leadership, we have to think about a definition. The conduct of one or person with a calling or an ability to influence other individuals to achieve a common desired outcome. Bennis and Nannis have published for decades on leadership studies, and they know and they've shown that qualities that are consistent with strong leadership have to do with competencies, commitment to excellence, and character. And I want to emphasize that the one time the U.S. women have, or any U.S. have won the World Cup has been into 1999, and Carla Overbeck was the team captain. As a leader, she demonstrated an inspiration, but not the best player. She was a water carrier, as they called her. She inspired and encouraged her team to that great success. And I also want to call attention to, we often have to look at business to understand leadership. Business Horizons in 2022 is an article about bringing character and developing character. Character is not a subjective amorphous entity. It's similar to grit, but it is a defined set of behaviors, and these can be trainable. Understand that growing evidence that we've seen since 1963 with the Milgram studies on obedience, where subjects actually tortured other subjects on stimulus for this, on to our most tragic events in 2020 in the United States. We've seen that good people can exhibit bad behaviors, but judgment can be taught. We teach it in our residencies, and it can be taught about how we improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this paper really emphasizes that good leaders understand the importance of embracing the power in people's differences and cultivating that perspective. And to develop those competencies and character of leaders to be able to manage and develop our employees and our people around us in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to set a tone and standardize our inclusive culture so that is a norm. Why is this? Because our current composition of physician workforce does really not reflect our population. In the United States, about 30% of the population are underrepresented minority populations. But by 2042, we're going to expect to see an equivalence of this, and we have to manage this within our professional arena. We know that this improves productivity and performance, enhances communication, and increases creativity, problem solving, and innovation. And that's the imperative for us. However, in 2018, the most recent census of orthopedic surgery in the United States demonstrated that while women are about 50% of medical students and our population, as we start to look at residents, and then in fact, in practicing surgeons, we see far less. And we reflect this in our Black populations and our Hispanic or Latinx populations as well. And so these are important because this gives us a leadership opportunity to attract and to recruit examples in who are men and women who are bold advocates and acknowledge inequity, to retain the people that we hire, that we train, so that we don't see less in practice than we are having in training. And then to institute development programs across systems and across societies so that we can promote equity across our profession. There is a lack of underrepresented minorities and women mentors, and that makes a barrier to recruitment. There's limited exposure before and sometimes during medical school with electives, not required rotations. There are myths and misunderstandings about finances, work-life balance, and also biases and strength. So this really represents opportunities for us to develop pipelines that show our individual women and underrepresented minorities that orthopedics specifically is a great profession. It's a privilege to be part of this. And as such, we look at opportunities for exposing early experiences to demonstrate the joy and the happiness in the program. We start with high school through the Perry Initiative here in the US, into college and into medical school through several other pipeline programs. We talk about pathway programs that are developed longitudinal curriculum and longitudinal mentoring of individuals that are seeking professions in the orthopedic arena. And so we look at medical students, and we encourage faculty participation in the musculoskeletal curriculum, the orthopedic interest groups, and we mentor and we develop programs within our departments and within the U.S. that enhance this. And it's been shown in numerous papers that leadership opportunities and scholarship opportunities, such as a funded scholarship to bring students that are women or that are underrepresented in medicine into programs, into departments, and to see people that look like them. And that is one of the aspects. When we think about resident education, resident selection, we have all of our faculty involved in the interviews. The ticket in is that they do a self-awareness implicit association test, which will be talked about in a few minutes. We encourage diverse faculty and resident interview panels, and we standardize our interview questions across the table. We blind our interviews to STEP scores, to direct cognitive application data to understand the human qualities of those individuals. And that allows us to evaluate diversity representation during the interview cycle and on their rotations even. And so when we think about retention, some of the barriers are that we have limited mentorship with the minority of women and underrepresented populations in our profession. So we have to educate mentors. We have to not have a zero tolerance for bullying or microaggressions, and to provide a clear, safe, and fair working environment that is honest, that has bidirectional feedback, and that allows people to do their best. There is often a minority tax where when we have just a few underrepresented minorities or women in a department or a society, that they're often asked to do more without necessarily protecting time or compensation for that. And that can be exhausting. Well, we provide leadership opportunities within the community and within the societies for this. And there are barriers to retention as well. Family leave policies are sometimes striking if in institutions that don't have policies or facilities for mothers that allow or perhaps just look the other way with harassment. So open harassment reporting systems, mentorship, and then again the unconscious bias. At Johns Hopkins, we have assistance resources for parents, for women that are looking to continue their careers and yet have children. And this is something that needs to be a leadership-driven, overt action. to create a climate where diversity is the highest priority. And by that, we look for bystander training, allyship, and zero tolerance. We have a direct curriculum that has invited speakers. And I will call into this that the Ruth Jackson Society has a speakers bureau, and IODA does too. That is a very valuable opportunity for people to be lecturers, to be visiting professors. We also have diversity nights and oftentimes opportunities for our women to get together and share and have that culture. And so the retention is because of a cultural competency training. We develop a specific curriculum, as I said, and we look towards strategic mentorship. We publish a lot, and this is something I think that you're seeing an increase across the Google Scholar of racial disparities, of looking at social determinants in orthopedic surgery. We have a diversity council that allows for mentorship of medical students, scholars, and faculty. And we do this through service. It gives us a great joy. These three individuals are national leaders in mentorship. Julia Soni and the AUKUS and the J.R. Gladden Society. Don Laporte, many of you know and is our residency director, and Amitabh Iyer is on Instagram with a couple 100,000 followers, I think, but has started Ortho Mentor with this. And so we know that in a business world, mentees earn more. They start earlier, they're better educated, and they have a direct career path which gives them wellness and happiness in their profession. And mentorship positively influences career choices. Mentorship in our program starts with the interest group at MS1 through an anatomy program that we've published about. And over the last 10 years, we've been very proud to have a consistent partnership with the American Orthopaedic Association Resident Leadership Forum and our administrative chief residents, so that we give them opportunities in an early stage to learn how to lead and to be able to do this in a safe environment. So these dialogues to drive inclusion include a cooperative relationship to develop mutual vulnerability and then trust. And then that went fast, I'm sorry, but there is it just goes, and I'm sorry, but there is a hope on the horizon. This was the US, a couple snapshots of websites from orthopedic programs in match day almost exactly 1 year ago, showing a striking change in our diversity and our inclusion across many programs. And many of those programs are now led by women. 10 years ago, there were 3 chairs in all of orthopedics in the country. And now we look at 9 outstanding leaders who are demonstrating diversity and inclusion in their practices and their programs. And so there is a hope, and I believe this, that leaders must recognize or be helped to recognize that there's an inclusion gap that impairs our advancement. It's imperative to change that, and we need to improve together through acknowledging unconscious bias, recruiting, retaining, and promoting based on merit, and seeking out allies who acknowledge and practice this. The way we understand this is intentional efforts to increase that pipeline, so we're not all pursuing the same few individuals for residency or for faculty, to give them early exposure and then continued career support, and do this in a holistic way that we look at with applications, whether it's faculty or residency, selecting the people that we can best reflect our patient population will benefit our programs and our profession, and most of all, our patients. And so thank you very much. It's an honor to be on this webinar today.
You're on mute,
Thank
Jenny.
you, Jim. Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. That was amazing. And I mean, we wouldn't have a problem if every residency was like yours. It's very impressive work. Mary, did you want to?
Sure. So next up, we're going to have Dr. Laurie Hiemstra, who will speak about being intentional about the inclusion of women in orthopedics.
Okay, there we go. Once I got it on full screen, my mute disappeared. So thank you, Jim. That was an excellent talk, and hopefully I can add some more to it. We're going to cover some of the same territory, but what I wanted to talk a little bit about is you can see as you listen to Jim talk, there's so much to do, and there's so much to learn about all those different things that he mentioned. And so how can you, if you're a big institution that has a lot of person power, you might be able to tackle all of those things. But some people work in a small institution that may not have the resources, or you might have to be really intentional about what you're going to tackle to try to improve gender diversity and inclusion and belonging. So I'm going to maybe cherry pick a little bit of those topics and delve a little bit deeper. And so, Jim, that was a really great introduction. And I'm sure these are all the topics we're going to be talking about in this session. So changing how we treat people in our workplace is all about changing culture. So you can't just make a rule and everyone will follow it. We really have to work on changing culture, because culture drives our experience. So if you're working in a business, if you're working in a hospital, no matter where you work, it's the culture of where you work that drives your experiences. And those experiences can be amazing, and you can feel included and you can feel like you belong and everybody works to the best of their abilities and they're happy. Or the culture can be one, maybe top-down power, and maybe a culture of bullying and harassment. And so it's really, all these initiatives are amazing, but if we don't change culture along with that, they won't last. Or they'll be really amazing in certain spots if we can't change the culture of medicine itself. So what I'd like to talk a little bit, we always talk about the number of women in orthopedic surgery, and we'll go over it very quickly. And numbers are very important, especially when your numbers are low, as I'll show you they are in orthopedics globally. But numbers just represent one thing. It doesn't represent whether people are included or belong. So we're going to cover some of these things that to me fall under that inclusion and belonging, which is women in leadership roles, thinking about things like the pay gap. You know, many male orthopedic surgeons don't think about that, but this is very difficult for women in orthopedics to understand that we make way less money than men for doing the same job. We'll touch on mentorship and sponsorship, as Jim already had, and of course harassment, because until there is no harassment, we can't get away from that. So this is data from IODA. This is was published in 2020, and it's data from 2019. So it's a couple years old now, but this was the first time we really looked across the globe to see how many female orthopedic surgeons there were. And I know this is a big chart, but you can see here's the percentage of female orthopedic surgeons. And you can see Estonia's winning the race. They have a female prime minister right now, so I think that may be part of it too, but they do pretty well in Estonia, but still the best country in our whole world is still under 30% female orthopedic surgeons. Canada's doing pretty good, US not doing so good. And you can see as you get past like number 10 in line, this drops off precipitously. And so again, 50% of medical students are female. We really aren't getting those great female candidates into orthopedics, and we have to be asking ourselves why that is. Here's the same data put out as a heat map. And so the different colors represent the different percentages of female orthopedic surgeons. And I'm not too concerned about the colors, but what should be really concerning to everybody is how many white spaces there are. So these are countries where we actually don't even have the data on how many female orthopedic surgeons there are. And I have to believe that if we can't even find that data, that number is very, very low. And this should be very concerning from a global perspective, how little we even know about how many women we have working in orthopedic surgery. So how do we get more people into orthopedics? And this has been the basis of most intentional diversity efforts, is get more people in. And Jim talked about pipeline programs, and those have all been very successful in certain countries. And I think we've done them in Canada. We have a session called Real Talk that we put before our annual meeting, and we invite high school students, medical students, university students. We let them talk to orthopedic surgery residents and actually really try to dispel those myths that orthopedic surgery is not for girls, because there is certainly people that are being told to this day over and over again, why would you want to do orthopedic surgery? Don't you want to have a life? Don't you want to have a family? That's not a specialty for girls. And we need to change that narrative right from the get-go, from when they're very young. And we need to change the narrative to them, but we also need to change the little bits of truth that might be in that by changing the culture of orthopedics. So how do we get more women in orthopedics? Well, we have to show them that they belong in orthopedics. And how do young women think they belong in orthopedics when they actually look up and actually see no female leaders in orthopedic surgery? So this is data from Canada again, done out of Vancouver at UBC. And this is just showing, this is academic orthopedic surgeons in Canada and going by academic rank on the bottom, and the orange is women and the blue is men. And when this data, I think this is 2019 data also, and you can see that the higher up in academic rank you go, the fewer and fewer women there are. And I actually believe there currently is only one female orthopedic surgery professor in Canada. And so why are there fewer and fewer women? Why, are women not being promoted? Are they not being promoted because of what we believe are the merits? So again, Jim mentioned looking at merits. Well, what do we consider meritocracy? If the guidelines and the needs for women leaders were all made by males and reflect a male dominant leadership hierarchy, then women can never measure up. So are we not promoting them? Are we not pushing them forward? Are we not giving them opportunity to get those skills? Are criteria for being leaders not appropriate? So do we need to rethink our meritocracy? So these are things we need to all think about. And again, always think of a bottom up and a top down approach. We need to change our systems, but we also need to use the grassroots to bring up more women and get them into those leadership positions, because it's leaders that create culture. And as we know, culture creates our experiences in the workplace. So if we don't have female leaders there, we're not going to create a culture of inclusion and belonging in orthopedics. So we need to support women in leadership roles. And this can take many forms. And I think each country people come from and each institution within the country might have different ways they need to do this, because we all run our medical systems in different ways. So mentoring and sponsoring is part of creating these leaders. So being intentional about who you mentor and sponsor, identifying those really great people who will be great leaders and bringing them up and sponsoring them through will be part of that. The gender pay gap is one I like to bring up because this one is really one of my sticks in my whatever. But this is data also from Ontario. And this looked at all the medical specialties, and the x-axis here is at the ratio of what men make compared to women doing the same specialty. And this has all been corrected for hours worked, type of practice, subspecialty and everything. So corrected data. The line here represents where men make equal to women for the same specialty. I'll just highlight here, these are the surgical specialties. And if your eyes are good enough, you can see right here, almost dead last is orthopedic surgery. And if you want to know what this ratio is, 1.57. So in Canada, male orthopedic surgeons make 1.57 times what female orthopedic surgeons make, and that's corrected data. And so this is very disturbing. And then I ask, how do we encourage our young women to go into orthopedics if they're facing a pay gap like this, where they have to work twice as hard for half the credit and then get paid half as much? So understanding the pay gap and why the pay gap exists is going to be key to getting more women into orthopedics, because they want to come into a situation where they're being treated equally. So why is there a gender pay gap? I think this is where the research needs to go. We don't know. There's lots of ideas of why there's a pay gap, but we need to change systems. And this is where a top-down approach is the only way that's going to help us, is changing how we're paid and not letting governments and not letting insurance companies dictate how we're paid. So instead of getting paid perhaps by how many cases you do or how many patients you see, we should be looking at different metrics. How do your patients do? What are their outcomes? Are they satisfied with their treatment? Is their whole socioeconomic status improved because of the treatment you've supplied, rather than just how many patients you can pump through your clinic? So again, changing systems to reflect our values. Lack of mentorship has been identified by most trainees, and that consistently say that lack of female mentorship especially was a barrier. And again, we know working towards improving mentorship programs and improving the mentors education on how to be a good mentor, I think, is really important. There's a skill to being a mentor, and I don't think we're taught that as we're going through our training. So teaching people how to be good mentors, teaching people how to be good mentees. And I think it is a bit of a myth that women coming up through think they need to have a female mentor. I think we need multiple mentors that cover all different aspects of our life, and they don't all have to be the same gender as you. I grew up with very few female orthopedic surgeons in my years, and I had excellent, amazing male mentors. And we want to be very careful that we cultivate our excellent male surgeons to be great mentors for women and for people who don't look like them, because we don't want to lose the benefit of what they have to offer. Sponsorship's a little bit easier. Mentorship implies a longer relationship. Sponsorship is easier. So this means just using your power to help someone. So giving someone's name for a talk, expanding their network, taking one of your residents around and introducing them to some famous surgeons at the meeting, opening doors for them so that they can use their own skills to advance their career. And this is really pivotal in career management. And it seems that sponsorship is much easier to get for male residents and male fellows than it is for female. And so being really intentional about who you sponsor and who we use our power for to help provide career boosts for the people underneath us, I think is going to be really important. And finally, we have to talk about bullying and harassment when we talk about inclusion and belonging in orthopedic surgery. And this was a article that was put out by Simon Fleming a couple of years ago. And I think everyone needs to read this article. It's not orthopedic specific, it's about surgery, but it is actually quite a disturbing article. But the reality is the standard we walk past is the standard we accept. And we know, even though we may not want to believe it, that there is a lot of discrimination, bullying, sexual harassment, and even up to sexual assault within orthopedics and surgery. And until that just does not happen anymore, there is no underrepresented group, female or other group, that will ever feel that they belong. Anyone should be able to go to work and expect to be not harassed and bullied. So I think that is a basic human right. And until we fix this problem, we need to be very intentional about not accepting any form of this in surgery. So zero tolerance is something we have to insist on. So if you see something, say something. And finally, we can't have equality or equity or inclusion and belonging at work if we don't have it at home. So again, most of the stats say that women, orthopedic surgeons, so we say we have to work twice as hard to get half the credit. Well, that's really difficult to do when you have to then go home and do twice the work at home. So the unequal division of labor at home, it really is a social norm, and that needs to change. And it is changing over time. This is my good friend, Brendan, who's an orthopedic surgeon in New Brunswick, and he is a fully involved dad. And this is what we need at home if we're going to thrive at work. So what are some strategies for women? Know that you're not alone. I think lately, with people being much more involved, we know we're not alone. We can talk to each other, we can share stories, and that's really important. There's lots of orthopedic groups nationally, internationally, regionally that you can join and really support and encourage other women. We need to lift each other up. For men, really be aware that our experience in orthopedics is different than yours is. So even just put yourself in a female orthopedic surgeon's shoes and just think what they might experience when they walk in a room. Be a sponsor, intentionally sponsor people, be an ally, and be an upstander. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie, and we'll look forward to discussion shortly. But next, I'd like to introduce Ian Incoll, who is going to talk about minimising unconscious bias in residency, selection and training. Thank you, Ian. to listen. We're not getting any sound through on that.
So I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak today on minimising bias in selection and training. My name is Professor Ian Incoll. I have a number of roles, and the main one being that I've been in most roles in the Australian Orthopaedic Association, and more recently teach on a master's program in surgical education. So what do surgeons believe? Well, firstly, they believe that they highly value objectivity and data, and they'd follow the evidence. But unfortunately, what we've found in the literature is that most disciplines that value objectivity are particularly susceptible to subtle gender biases because they're not on guard against them. They don't look for them because they feel that they are objective. Surgeons believe if they were presented with disconfirming evidence, they would change their minds. Unfortunately, it's been shown by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their Thinking Fast and Slow book that dual processing theory has a lot to say about whether disconfirming evidence will change our minds. Most of the time, experts will use fast thinking, which is easy, low taxing, but it's error prone, and it leads to reinforcement of stereotypes and implicit bias. It takes much more effort to do slow thinking, rational thought, which is needed to incorporate new information or change any existing biases. In this book, Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, dual processing theory is further discussed in terms of cognitive dissonance. So if you imagine your decisions or your opinions are the ball at the top of the pyramid, using type 1 or fast thinking tends to encourage confirmation bias, and you'll continue to roll down that left side of the pyramid. If, however, you use type 2 thinking, you may well be able to incorporate disconfirming evidence into your thoughts and actions and implicit biases. A couple of important points about biases. They're like optical illusions in two important respects. They lead us to wrong conclusions from data, and their apparent rightness persists even when we've been shown the trick. It's so powerful, the need for continence, when people are forced to look at disconfirming evidence, that they'll criticise, distort, or even dismiss the evidence to maintain or to even strengthen their existing beliefs. And that's the underlying confirmation bias. And one of many tools that's been suggested to address this confirmation bias is the type of Socratic questioning, where you ask, what information would it take for you to change your mind on this particular point? What data would it need? More realistically, if you think about the work required to avoid implicit biases, it really is a bit of an uphill role. A type 2 thinking requires effort, requires slowing down, requires examining the existing evidence rather than the implicit reaction or fast thinking. Surgeons believe when providing care, they remain unaffected by gender or ethnicity alignment. Unfortunately, many papers, just in orthopaedic, but across medical care in general, confirm that there is bias and differences in offering operations for women as opposed to men, and for African American and Hispanic populations as opposed to white. Surgeons believe that they themselves were selected to become surgeons in an objective and fair merit-based process. So I'd like to direct you now to a great study out of the music arena, looking at gender biases in selections for orchestras. Now, before about 1960, it was felt that females were unable to play to the same standard as males, and that explained why such a low proportion of new hires were female in general. Fortunately, this was examined, and the introduction of a blinding curtain so that the gender of the aspirant couldn't be told by the selectors improved the proportion of female new hires. But there was still a lower proportion. And this was again felt to be confirming evidence that females just couldn't play as well in the musical instruments. Then sometime later it was introduced either to have carpets on the stage or to aspirants to remove their shoes. And this happened at that second red arrow and led to a fairly equal gender balance once that sound clue of a high heel hitting a wooden floor was removed from the selectors. We've looked at selection differences in orthopaedic selection in Australia with some 2,500 applications, and found that both in the CV score, so their prior experience, and in the referees, there were gender differences, which led to more males being invited to interview for selection processes. And some of you may be noticing there's some cognitive dissonance happening at the moment with these graphs, because I've deliberately placed the females as blue and the males as red. And it may well be that your brains are trying to associate blue with males. Just another example of an implicit bias. So what are some of the potential dissuaders of females going into orthopaedics? So we know that a lot of them don't consider it as a career or don't consider it even out of medical school. Some of these things are personal attributes, some work-life considerations, and particularly experiences in med school or in residency with negative aspects of orthopaedics. Surgeons believe when performing assessments on trainees or colleagues, they remain unaffected by gender or ethnicity alignment. But what we've also done is looked at our assessment tools, so our electronic logbook, our feedbacks, and our workplace-based assessments, all of which show a gender difference, showing more access to operating and higher levels of assessment as independent or efficient for males as opposed to females. And this cuts across both genders of supervisor, but female and male supervisors score males as being more competent, more able to work independently. We've looked at the logbook more recently with some 550,000 procedures and found that females have a lower proportion of access to cases where they're doing the primary surgery. So about 5% less operating for the females as opposed to males. And in that graph on the right, what you can see is over time, there's a higher proportion of meaningful autonomy for the males as opposed to the females, almost all the way through surgery, those blue bars. And you imagine that this is a cumulative effect on reducing the amount of exposure and training and experience that the females will get throughout orthopaedic training. So what are some of the typical pushbacks you might get if this is brought up in your cultures? Everyone should just be judged on their merit, but it ignores the structural merit biases in the system, like we had in our CV scoring or referee systems. They should be judged on how well they do the job. Also ignores the complicity of groups that are already advantaged in the existing structures. It avoids discussions of that privileges and narrows explored available options for resolving the problem. Excellent males are missing out. It comes from a perspective that females are receiving some sort of affirmative action now, whereas rather actually this comes from redressing inequities and in reducing implicit biases. And Gilovich's headwinds and tailwinds availability bias, the feeling of a sudden headwind when usually you've had tailwinds can feel quite disconcerting to males in a male preferenced world. And the common one, others may be biased, but I'm certainly not. Very simple is to take the implicit association test from Harvard. So what are the Association of Women Surgeons recommendations from 2019? So what I've done is taken those recommendations and adapted them to what particularly might apply in the surgical field. So we want to commit, the organisation leaders must commit to a culture shift. There should be bias literacy training for all residents and surgeons. And wherever possible in communications events, we should provide counter-stereotypical exposure. There should be continual review of selection and assessment processes. When was the last time your selection or assessment processes were reviewed from the point of view of bias against gender or race? There should be deliberative processing strategies for selection and assessments to take into account the implicit biases that are found and have those adjusted for. There should be encouragement of mentoring and sponsorship opportunities, as well as allyship from those already in the preference group, such as old white males as myself. And empower the individual and support their voice, really important. So what can you do about it individually? Anyone listening to this presentation? First of all, recognise that it exists. Don't deny it. Examine your own biases and take the test. There's many different implicit association tests for different aspects of bias. When it may exist, look for it and make it explicit, like I've done with those graphs and explorations of selection and assessment. Have contact with different groups, expose yourself to those different groups. And that helps then to counter the stereotypes and take perspectives of those people in the disadvantaged groups. Avoid bias reinforcement, such as microaggressions or gaslighting. Avoid your triggers that would take you into that fast thinking perpetuation of implicit bias, and slow down. Do some slow thinking, and particularly challenge the status quo. Challenging this will help to build a more inclusive community and represent the community that we serve in surgery and orthopaedics. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer session.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that great talk, Ian, and to Laurie and Jim too. Really a lot of important information, a lot to consider, and I think serves as a good foundation for our discussion. So please, for anyone who's listening, please feel free to put questions in the chat. Like we definitely want to try to address as many questions as possible. And so I will just start with one. I mean, I think there was a good emphasis on topics that are important across the world, right? That's one huge advantage of having this type of webinars. We hear perspectives from all over the world, but we also see where the similarities are. And one underlying point really is impacting diversity in ortho is the culture and this sense of belonging. And so first I'm going to turn this to Samantha, but then I certainly open it up to the whole panel. So I would just say, what are some things that you try to do yourself or that you've tried to do within the groups that you're involved in to create a sense of belonging and to help change this culture of orthopedics to make it feel more welcoming and inviting to women and other minorities in orthopedics?
Thank you very much, Mary. I think it's slightly easier for me in the sense that I work in a department where it's very multicultural. A lot of our trainees come from India and Pakistan. And being from a minority background and being a foreigner to England, I wasn't born here, I was born in Guyana in South America. I understand some of the issues that they face. So it's slightly easier coming from that background. But the important thing for me is communication and a sense of curiosity. So that means that if one doesn't make assumptions about a trainee or a colleague, and your curiosity leads you to ask questions, to ask what their needs are. I think it's quite often with good intention, sometimes we make assumptions of what needs are. And it's important to understand that, first of all, different groups have different needs. So not everyone from an ethnic minority background has the same need as someone else within that group. And even within the groups, there are variations. So for instance, within the Asian population, we find that Indians do better than those from Pakistan, do better than those from, say, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh in particular. And within the Black group, Black Africans are excelling better than Black Caribbeans. And so unless we actually start asking questions and finding out what the problems are, we can't get the effective solutions. But the most important thing, I think, is to try and work on improving that culture. And that culture comes from having a sense of openness and fairness and communication. But I also want to add that whilst we are working on trying to improve the society and the workforce environment, that those minority groups also have to do work on themselves, because we can't wait for the system to improve. We have to also work on ourselves. And so forming into an organization such as the British Association of Black Surgeons is to do that, is to bolster their morale and their self-confidence so that they can better react or avoid the incorrect response when faced with a difficult situation.
Great, thank you so much for that response, Samantha. Did anybody else want to comment?
I've actually typed in two questions in the chat box. I think one was for Laurie and the other one was for Dr. Ian. Laurie, I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the biggest hurdle that one faces when trying to change the culture of an association, not of a workplace where it's a little bit captive and the people are known, when you're dealing with a large organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rajuda. I have taken the approach that you can't come in like a bull in a china shop. So again, you're taking a group of people who have had centuries of privilege, that the whole system is based on that privilege, and you're trying to institute change. So if you just waltz in and go, you know what, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to have half the board be women. We're going to do this. We're going to change your residency program. We're going to do this and that. Like everyone's just going to go, whoa, you know, get lost. And so I think that the biggest challenge for me, and the most I've agonized over navigating, is just how to slowly and kindly institute change, so that those grassroots change are the things that create the bigger change. So again, just making a group of women that get together and talking to your residents about standing up for themselves, or explaining to their male fellow residents when they say things that actually aren't okay. Half the time it's not vindictive. They just don't even know that they're saying things that are gendered or discriminatory. So, you know, and then making sure that, you know, you have women speakers at your meeting, and then maybe publishing a paper. It's, for us in Canada, that's how I've approached it, is to try to slowly bring in the culture from the grassroots. Because you have to build an army, right? So you can't have one person. Rajuda can't go to all of India and say, this is how we're going to fix it for women, right? But if Rajuda, you have your group now, and you have 100 women that are now spreading all these tips that you heard from all your speakers, spreading it up and building up that grassroots movement. I think that's probably the way to go, at least in societies where it's hierarchical like ours is. So it's frustratingly slow, but I think it's probably the slow wins the race.
Gala, you wanted to make a comment?
Thank you, Mary. Yes, I totally agree with Samantha that we have to put in not only in our hospitals and in our institutions, but in our societies, the topic on the table. And for us in Argentina, was crucial to work with and within the society, because otherwise we couldn't achieve anything. And for instance, when we wanted to, we say what we can do to change the culture. And as one doctor here, I think its name is Stuart Proper, asked that we are talking about, we are always talking with people that already want this change and what we can do in order to visualize these topics for people that are not aware of this. And so we start that working a lot inside the society with the education committee. And this year, it will be the first year that diversity topics would be inside the specialty course. We have a 3-year course in order to be an orthopedic surgeon in the society. And we start working with the education committee program in order to install these topics inside the course. And for me, working with all the committees and with the board of the AAOT, it was crucial.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Gala, that is an excellent point. I think it would be interesting to hear like perspectives, other perspectives too. But I think that where you're saying, incorporate as part of the main session, right? It's not a breakout, it's not concurrent with like 5 other things that are the cutting edge, whatever techniques, and everybody's going to go to that and not go to the diversity session. Having it as part of the main session, you're right, that's absolutely critical. And I think gets to what Stuart was asking about. That's a way where everybody's going to be exposed to it. Jenny,
Well, we have some questions, so I'd just like to address them. Thank you. One from Christy Weber, past president of both the American Academy and IODA. Dr. Hiemstra, not only are women overrepresented in lower paying professions, but in medicine, when women enter the field in large numbers, data shows that the average compensation drops. Any comments on that?
Outside of anger. So I have 2 comments on that. One is it is well shown, and probably the biggest example is obs-gynae, where 50 years ago most obs-gynae were men, and now actually something like 60 or 70% are women, and their pay has actually dropped. So feminization of pay, or something like that they call it. And so it shows in business too. I think it also applies to teachers. Used to be all male teachers, and now many more female teachers. And then, so this is a societal problem where society values male work more than female work. So, but I think part you have to ask yourself, why does that happen? Like somebody's not sitting there going, okay, it's a bunch of women here, now let's drop their pay. But who are the leaders? Who are at the table when they make the pay structures? So, when they decide the billing structure to do a total hip and a total knee and a foot and ankle procedure, there's always a group of people that go fight it. Well, who's at the table is all men. And so who's fighting for the high fee codes for the spine and for arthroplasty? A whole bunch of men. And women aren't making it to the table. So if women aren't at the table when we decide fee structures, there's nobody fighting for the poor pediatric orthopedic surgeons who have the highest number of women, but we have the lowest number of leaders in those positions. So I think that's probably the root.
Yes. Another question that I'd just really invite everyone on the panel to answer is, what strategies can be employed to engage with those who aren't that enthusiastic? So I might start with Jim.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is, we've given a lot of thought to this, and and I sit I have a platform as a non-intersected, non-minority person to really speak to this, and speak as an ally. One of the slides I talked about, and all of us have spoken about allyship, is to say, look, we have privilege now, and I just shared with the group, and we could maybe share with the whole group that now very old paper, but it still is is iconic, from Peggy McIntyre, and that this notion of saying, look, just get over this. The faculty, our faculty, have not been required to read or do part of the didactics, but they've been encouraged. And they're not, what we find is that over time, it becomes culturally more acceptable. And I think Laurie's comment about the culture is really one where when people see others like them doing activities like reading, studying, and exploring diversity, it becomes more culturally acceptable to do. And I think we're not going to take this on by force. I think we'll take it on a little at a time, hopefully more than 217 years, which has been published to be the time to where we get equity. But, you know, to understand it's okay to do this, and it's okay to say, look, let's talk about it. We have grand rounds and we encourage. We've had Speak Up Ortho founders. We've had many people that have come that are leaders in the inclusion space, whether they're medicine or not, to be able to say we're patterning our academic program and come with it. If you want to interview, you got to do the implicit test, as Ian talked about. I think that it just becomes more than just an evolution, but sort of a nudge to the to the program. Hopefully that's a helpful answer.
Ian, would you like to comment on what you feel have been the most effective strategies in your experience?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is that culture eats strategy for lunch. No matter what you come up as a strategy, it's going to be a long haul. I saw there's a question there from Stuart about is there a stratagem that can work worldwide? And I don't think there is. I think there's lots of different strategies that all need to be undertaken at the same time. So we need to work on the implicit biases of our general membership. We need to work on access to selection. We need to work on recruitment. All of these different facets are really important, and each of them will need a local tweak. So in some cultures, it'll be that there is just no acceptance within the membership that it even exists. So it's going to require that little bit of headwind, tailwind, trying to get them to understand that this really does exist by evidence. You know, what data will you need to actually change your mind about this? So I don't think there's a simple solution, and it's multiple different strategies are going to be needed. And probably the most important of all is patience.
True, I agree. Rajuta, would you like to comment on what has been working in your part of the world to move diversity forward?
Yes. So I think, because India as a diverse country inherently woven into the fabric, I think we understand that we need to have a lot of different ways of looking at the same problem. So when I started off with voice, the first thing that I kind of did is to really draw attention to it by asking for a separate session for women at the annual conference of the Indian Orthopaedic Association. And because that got the spotlight, then there were a lot of detractors that came up saying, why do you even want it? Why do you want reservation for a separate session? Why do you it should be deservation? And then gradually, when they saw how good those speakers were, inclusion in subsequent sessions and the overall program also improved. Another way we've been approaching this is we've been really championing each other pretty well. We are almost 380 women now in orthopedics. And the ones which are already in some leadership positions, we've really been championing them. We've been asking them to really take on mentees as their own fellows. And whenever there's any discussion about an oration, what we've all decided is that we will propose the woman's name who we know has really done well, so that at least it comes in the reckoning. Then our pioneers, in their honor, every state is now trying to get a prize instituted in their honor. For example, for the main Indian Orthopaedic Association, we have Dr. Ficke who was a pioneer in 1940s. And similarly, now in every state, whoever has been the senior lady, in her honor, we are trying to get a prize or a medal session awarded. And last but not the least, we're really working on all the orthopedic fathers who have daughters who want to get into orthopedics, because they understand this better. They talk to their own counterparts, and I think then slowly it's still percolating. But yeah, like Laurie said, we have a long way to go. But the acceptance from 2016 to 2023, we've seen a massive jump in that, versus what took us from 2005 to get it even instituted as a group was 2005 to 2016. And now within 6 years, we've literally doubled, more than tripled our strength, I would say so. So things do change, but it's taking time. And now we're collaborating with international groups and, trying to put in more visibility I think that's the first thing that we're working on internationally as well.
And Gala, you spoke a bit about education and leadership in the association. What else has been working for you?
Well, actually, we started.
You're on mute, Gala.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, we've been working in the Women's Committee since 3 years ago. So we wanted to start with some objectives. As Laurie said, we have to do it progressively. When we started, we wanted to take every topic, but as soon as we see how amount of work that was, and so we started. We are 15 in the committee. We represent most of the specialty societies, and so most of the specialty societies are involved with the Women's Committee. We started doing during the pandemic. We started doing some workshops, online workshops for med students, and that was amazing because we only have like a 13% of women inside the residency by now. And actually, when after 2 years, we started having during interviews 30% of women, and most of the women that were applying, they put in the curriculum, they put that they attend those workshops and they were inspired in those, and that was amazing because we had so much med students involved that we expected, and now we are promoting a mentorship program for residents and for fellows in order to achieve that kind of sponsorship Laurie was talking about, because without it, we can achieve anything. And what we saw is that we only a few amount of women can have a vote, and actually boys in the association, because for becoming into the board or becoming into the committees, you have to have a certified membership, and most of only 27 women out of 600 have that kind of membership, and so we have to work in order for women to apply for that membership, because otherwise they can't be included in the board of directors or in the committees to have management positions. And so I think that these mentorship programs, we could achieve that. We could achieve that more women have more voice. And it's a hard work, and actually we started doing inside the association because in my country it's really tough to organize like another society, another female society outside, because we do not have so much income in order to have a secretary and all the whole infrastructure for that. And so for us, working with the main associations was our main objective, so we can change things from inside.
Thank you. And Samantha, did you want to make a few brief comments? We'll
Yes, I would. I would. Thank you.
10 minutes.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, it's the area of diversity that I am passionate about is a difficult one. It's challenging because ethnic diversity doesn't seem to get as much buy-in or interest as talking about gender or perhaps LGBTQ. And so I find it a very sort of challenging area in which to work. I tried to find commonality. I remember only recently at a conference speaking, trying to engage a colleague into doing some, getting involved in diversity work, and said, I'm sick about hearing, diversity. No one talks about cognitive diversity. I'm being ostracized because of whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, then you're then precisely the person who should be supporting me, because you understand what it's like to be discriminated against. So trying to find that common ground. But one of the initiatives that I found worked very well in my hospital was it was instituted by the interim chief executive that for every single appointment in the hospital where there was someone from an ethnic minority background applying, then they had to write to the board to explain why that person was not appointed. Now, that might not have changed who was appointed, but it made people stop and think. as to what criteria they were using. So I would like to see that come across the board, and also feedback being given to candidates, particularly those from minority backgrounds, because if it is that we want to get the numbers increased and we're serious about it, we have to have some kind of target or something that we're working towards, affirmative action. And so we need to, from that pool, support them. If they're not good this time around, what can they do to be better the next time around? And so we need to put measures in place where we're giving adequate feedback. But it's important, as I said, coming back to that thing about different cultural groups, because I was in a conference with the Royal College of Surgeons, and they were talking about issues affecting minority backgrounds. And in fact, the person who was most vocal was an Asian man. And his perspective of what is happening in a diversity area is completely different to mine. And I arrived at that meeting late, and he was given a certain point of view, and I came and said, well, actually, no, that isn't true. This is my perspective. And then once I said, he said, oh, yes, okay, I agree with that. So we do have to be careful. It's not enough to have just one diverse person in these groups. We have to get more, to get a broader viewpoint, because one group cannot represent the other.
Okay. So perhaps just for our last few minutes, if I could ask each of our guest speakers, Jim, then Laurie, then Ian, to pass some comments about what they would say to women looking towards a career in orthopaedics. Jim?
Well, one thing that's you just find a mentor, and there's been some questions about this. I think that if you have access, and I will just say on my Twitter, I will post the most recent journal of the AAOS, and that link in February of RJOS is a great resource for looking at societies, at organizations that have active mentorship programs. I think this is is a great field, and I would encourage anyone that's on this to contact any of us. I'm willing to do this, and my Twitter is Straight Bones Jim.
Laurie?
I think I'd say, if you love it, do it. So it's just like having a baby. I know you have a baby and everyone gives you all this advice and it all conflicts because it's all based on their little baby. And so if you love orthopedics, there are many, many, many programs around the world and many hospitals where you can work that treat women better than others. So if you listen to the advice from someone that is in a particularly bad place, that might not be what the whole world is like. So ultimately, you spend your whole life working and you have to do what you love. And there's so many allies and great people in orthopedics. You should do what you love. You just may have to look to find that you work and train in a place that thinks like the people on this call. Thank you.
And finally, Ian.
Jim and Laurie have taken all the good stuff. Look, I really think it is the most encouraging thing I think I could say is that there is examination of what's going on at the moment. Most organisations around the world are exploring how they're doing selection, and so selection should be becoming fairer. If your association is not exploring how they select and whether there's bias involved, please get onto it. But yeah, for those junior medical students that want to come and do orthopaedics, it's a great community and it is improving.
Thank you so much. And Mary, did you want to make some closing?
No, I was just going to thank everybody for their very insightful comments and the excellent talks and the discussion. And thank you for everyone that attended and added questions in the chat too. I think it's really been a lot of great suggestions proposed, and hopefully things that we can adopt really around the world.
Thank you. And I would also like to add that IODA are developing a global mentorship program, so watch this space. But in the meantime, reach out to your local orthopaedic associations and people you know in your own regions. Thank you everyone for joining us, and this will be recorded, so it will be available online as well on our website and on social media. And thank you to everyone, to Jim Ficke from the US, to Laurie Hiemstra from Canada, Ian Incoll from Australia, Samantha Tross from the UK, Rajuta Mehta from India, and Gala Santina from Argentina. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jenny, Mary.